Just 4 days after leaving port, the most magnificent ship ever built vanished beneath the waves. A single collision, more than 1,500 lives lost, and the vessel hailed as unsinkable sank to the bottom of the ocean, over 4,000 meters deep. But here's the part that doesn't make sense. The Titanic sent out a distress call with its exact coordinates. Rescue ships reached the lifeboats just in time. So why did it take humanity more than 70 years to find the wreck? Deep beneath the freezing North Atlantic, where sunlight never touches, the Titanic didn't just rest. It waited. Like a coffin sealed not just by pressure and salt, but by silence. That night, it wasn't just a ship that sank. It was a vault, one that buried some of the world's wealthiest men, their secrets, and perhaps a crime too massive for history to name. The survivors were shamed, the dead revered but questioned, and among the victims were powerful bankers and billionaires, men who stood in the way of something larger, and conveniently never made it to New York. The distress signal was clear. The rescue was swift. So why was the wreck so hard to find? This is not just the story of a shipwreck. This is a story about truth, buried so deep. You'd think the ocean itself was trying to keep it hidden. It was April 10th, 1912. The RMS Titanic left the port of Southampton, bound for New York. It was more than a ship. It was a floating palace, a symbol of human ambition wrapped in steel and luxury. At 269 meters long and weighing over 50,000 tons, it was the largest passenger liner in the world. Lavish dining rooms, a gym, a swimming pool, elevators, and even Turkish baths, all designed to declare one thing: this ship could not fail. On board were 2,223 souls. Among them, aristocrats, movie stars, artists, millionaires, and moguls, some of the richest and most influential people on the planet. They were promised comfort, they were promised safety, they were promised arrival. The ship glided across calm waters. The sky was clear, no wind, no moon, just silence. And then at 11:40 p.m. on April 14th, that silence shattered. A massive iceberg scraped along the starboard side, ripping open the hull like a blade through cloth. Water surged in, flooding 6 compartments. The pumps could not keep up. The steel could not hold. Titanic had been dealt a wound it could not survive. Panic swept the decks. Flares were fired. The crew began launching lifeboats, but there weren't enough. Titanic, in its arrogance, carried only 20 boats, capable of holding just over half the people aboard. And even then, many boats left half empty. People didn't believe the ship could sink, until it did. At 2:18 a.m., with her bow already swallowed by the sea, Titanic broke in half. The stern lifted high into the air before crashing down in a thunder of steel and screams. Within minutes, the great ship vanished into darkness. Over 1,500 people were thrown into water colder than ice. Only 706 would live to tell the tale. But even survival came at a cost. Most died not from drowning, but from hypothermia, frozen alive in a matter of minutes. The cries for help echoed across the empty sea. And then silence returned. The world called it an accident, but it didn't feel like one. Not to the families who buried empty coffins. not to the men and women who had trusted their lives to a dream built on pride, and certainly not to those who would later ask, if this was just a tragedy, why does it still feel like a cover-up? The Titanic sent out a distress call with precise coordinates. The Carpathia reached those coordinates and rescued the survivors. So in theory, finding the wreck should have been easy. But it was. For more than 70 years, the Titanic lay undisturbed, hidden beneath miles of black water, as if the ocean itself had conspired to erase its resting place. In 1953, the first serious attempt to locate the wreck was made. British businessman Riston Beasley dropped dynamite into the sea, hoping sonar echoes would reveal the ship. But the ocean replied with silence. Years passed. Expeditions came and went, each more desperate than the last. One Texas oil tycoon even brought a monkey named Titan aboard, claiming it could psychically point to the wreck's location on a map. He believed showmanship would lead to discovery. It didn't. Even when the best minds and most advanced technology were finally deployed, the Titanic still refused to be found. Robert Ballard, a marine geologist from Woods Hole, tried in the 1970s with newly developed sonar and camera systems. But his mission ended in failure. The equipment shattered, the data lost, and the dream sunk once again. But Ballard didn't give up. Unlike others, he had one advantage no one else had: access to the United States Navy. And while the Navy had no real interest in the Titanic, they were interested in deep-sea surveillance. In exchange for funding, Ballard agreed to use his tools to secretly investigate the wrecks of 2 lost nuclear submarines. While mapping the debris fields of those submarines, Ballard noticed something. When a vessel sinks that deep, it doesn't fall in one clean piece. It explodes under pressure. Fragments scatter. Heavy objects land first. Lighter debris drifts, leaving behind a kind of undersea trail, a trail that points back to the source. Ballard realized everyone had been looking for the ship, but maybe they should have been looking for the trail. With this new strategy, and with only a handful of days left in his mission, Ballard deployed a camera sled named Argo. It skimmed just above the ocean floor, sending back live video in real time. He watched as the screen showed nothing but sand and shadows. Hours passed, then days. The ocean seemed endless until suddenly it was. Blurry shapes began to take form, not rock, not coral, something human-made, a boiler, a twisted pipe, a broken plate. The Titanic. 73 years after she disappeared, her remains came into view 3,800 meters below the surface. Her bow still eerily intact, the railings rusted but recognizable. The stern shattered and collapsed, lying far apart from the front as if trying to escape the weight of memory. Celebration gave way to stillness. The crew on board fell silent. No one spoke. They all knew this wasn't just a shipwreck. It was a graveyard. And the strangest part, the wreck was just 3,300 feet away from where earlier expeditions had searched for years. So close, yet just outside the reach of every theory, as if it didn't want to be found. When the Titanic slipped beneath the surface, it didn't just take lives. It took legacies, dreams, and power. Among the dead were 3 men who didn't just ride in first class, they stood among the most powerful figures on Earth. John Jacob Astor IV, the wealthiest man in America, an inventor, a war veteran, a tycoon whose fortune was almost mythological. He had the resources to survive. He could have demanded a seat, but instead he stepped aside. He placed his pregnant wife on a lifeboat, kissed her goodbye, and vanished into the Atlantic. Benjamin Guggenheim, heir to one of the richest Jewish dynasties in Europe, when told he had to abandon ship, he refused to die in his nightgown. He returned to his cabin, dressed in his finest tuxedo, and re-emerged on deck with a quiet resolve. "We are dressed in our best," he said, "and prepared to go down like gentlemen." And Isidor Straus, a co-owner of Macy's department store, his wife, Ida, was offered a lifeboat seat, but she refused. "Where you go, I go," she told him. They sat down together on deck chairs, wrapped in a blanket, and waited. Three of the wealthiest men in the Western world. None of them survived. And here's the unsettling part. They all had one thing in common. They opposed the creation of the U.S. Federal Reserve. In the years leading up to the Titanic disaster, there had been a battle among America's elite over who would control the future of the nation's money. J.P. Morgan, the infamous banker, was the man behind Titanic's construction. He was supposed to be on the ship too. He had a ticket, a suite, luggage already loaded. But at the last minute, he didn't board, no real explanation. Just business matters. Shortly after the Titanic sank, the Federal Reserve Act passed, and Morgan's power only grew. Coincidence, or something darker? Some believe the sinking of the Titanic was not a maritime tragedy, but an execution. A cold, calculated removal of those who stood in the way of a centralized banking system. The ship was the perfect setup. A vessel no one questioned. A place where lifeboats were few. And silence absolute. The deaths of Astor, Guggenheim, and Straus have been remembered with reverence. But beneath the flowers and monuments, still lingers a question that won't go away. Did they die by chance or by design? If the Titanic was just an accident, why are there so many versions of what really happened? Some stories were whispered from the start, others surfaced decades later, but they all share one thing: they refuse to go away. One of the most enduring theories claims that the ship that sank wasn't the Titanic at all. In 1912, the White Star Line owned two nearly identical ships, the RMS Titanic and her sister ship, the RMS Olympic. The Olympic had been damaged in a collision the year before, badly enough that some believed it was beyond repair. But fixing it would have been a financial disaster. So the theory goes, the ships were secretly swapped. Olympic was disguised as Titanic and sent out to sea not for glory but to be deliberately lost. The goal? A massive insurance payout. And the price? Over 1,500 lives. Too outrageous to be true, maybe. But when you look closer, things get strange. The lifeboats carried the name Titanic, but other parts on board reportedly bore the serial numbers of the Olympic. The layout of certain areas didn't match Titanic's original blueprints. And the crew, most of them had served on the Olympic, and reportedly refused to speak of the voyage ever again. Then there's the theory of the fire. Days before Titanic set sail, a fire broke out deep in the coal bunker. It burned for days, weakening the metal along the same section of hull that would later rupture when the iceberg struck. Some researchers believe the blaze made the ship fatally vulnerable, and the owners knew it. But instead of delaying the voyage, they sailed anyway. Prestige came first, reputation over safety. Others believe the tragedy was a race. Titanic was built not just to be luxurious, but fast. Rivals like the Lusitania and Mauritania had already claimed records. Titanic's owners wanted headlines. So when the iceberg warnings came in, Captain Smith was allegedly told to push forward. "We must arrive early," some said. "No delays." That choice to speed ahead through icy waters may have turned survivable damage into a death sentence. Still others point to sabotage, that the Titanic was targeted by a German U-boat. Survivors reported hearing a second explosion. Some claim to have seen a ship nearby, one that ignored distress signals. Just 2 years later, World War I would erupt, and German submarines were known to patrol those same waters. Could Titanic have been a test, a warning, or a mistake the world was never told about? There are even whispers of something more ancient. Some say the Titanic carried an Egyptian artifact, a cursed mummy, sealed in stone, with a warning inscribed on its case. "Death will come on swift wings to whoever disturbs me." The artifact, it said, was smuggled aboard by a wealthy collector, and after the sinking, its whereabouts vanished. Years later, fragments of the same coffin lid were allegedly discovered in the British Museum. And perhaps the strangest theory of all was written 14 years before Titanic ever set sail. In 1898, author Morgan Robertson published a novella titled Futility, or The Wreck of the Titan. It told the story of a massive, luxurious ship named Titan, deemed unsinkable, that hits an iceberg in the North Atlantic and sinks. Nearly all on board die due to a lack of lifeboats. The similarities are so uncanny they seem impossible, unless they were intentional. The deeper you dive into the story of Titanic, the more the lines blur between truth and legend, coincidence and design. Maybe it really was just an accident. But if that's true, why does it feel like someone or something wanted it to happen? The Titanic claimed over 1,500 lives, but for some, survival came with a different kind of death. Among the few who made it out alive was a man named Masabumi Hosono, the only Japanese passenger on board. He escaped the freezing waters, but he would never escape what came after. At first, his survival was a miracle. He returned home to Japan quietly, shaken but alive. And then the headlines came, the accusations, the shame. People said he had taken the seat of a woman or child, that he had snuck onto a lifeboat meant for others, that he had violated the sacred Bushido code, the ancient Japanese ideal that honor was worth more than life itself. He was labeled a coward, a disgrace. Newspapers denounced him. His name was removed from government positions. Textbooks held him up as an example of failure, not because he had done something terrible, but because he survived. He spent the rest of his life in the shadows, consumed by guilt, rejected by a nation that demanded death over dishonor. But here's what they didn't tell you. New evidence later showed that the lifeboat he boarded wasn't full. There was no pushing, no theft of another's seat, no betrayal, just a man who chose to live and suffered for it. He had witnessed the horror. He had seen mothers let go of their children. He had watched the ship break in half as men and women vanished into the sea. And in that moment, he didn't act selfishly. He acted human. He rowed. He helped others. He even saved passengers by steering the lifeboat away from the wreckage's deadly suction. But none of that mattered to the world that judged him. Not until 85 years later, when historians finally cleared his name. By then, Hosono was long gone, buried in silence. His descendants still carried the shame, all for a choice that anyone might have made. It's easy to romanticize death when you're not the one drowning. It's easy to demand sacrifice when you're not the one holding your breath. And that's the forgotten tragedy of Titanic. That sometimes the world doesn't just punish those who die. It punishes those who survive. The Titanic was more than a ship. It was a monument to human ambition, a floating cathedral of luxury, ego, and pride. And in a single night, it became a grave. But what if that grave wasn't just the result of ice and steel? What if it was built long before the ship ever touched water? Some say it was an accident. Others say it was a setup, a financial purge, a swapped identity, a fire, a curse, a prophecy, a submarine, or even divine punishment for human arrogance. Maybe none of them are true. Maybe all of them are. What we know for certain is this: the Titanic was filled with people who believed they had control over time, over nature, over fate. And one by one they were humbled, the rich, the powerful, the innocent, the guilty, all swallowed by the same sea. It took decades to find the wreck, but when they did, they didn't just find twisted metal. They found shoes still arranged in pairs, plates still stacked on tables, a wall clock forever frozen at 2:19 a.m. And even now, that silence, 4,000 meters below, continues to whisper questions we may never answer. Why did the ship sink the way it did? Why did so many die who could have lived? Why did those with the most power have the least chance? And why, after more than a century, do we still feel like something about it was never right? Maybe because the Titanic wasn't just a tragedy. It was a mirror. And in that mirror, we see a reflection of ourselves, of what we build, what we believe, and what we lose when we put too much faith in our own invincibility.